Ahead of the peace talks in Istanbul, Ukraine launched a massive drone strike deep into the heart of Russia for the very first time. My colleague Jyotsna will get you all the details. Over to you, Jyotsna.
All right, thank you so much, Diksha. And well, Ukraine's massive drone attack on Russian military bases is unprecedented. These strikes hit targets deep inside the Russian territory, thousands of kilometers from the front line. We bring you all the details, but first let's understand how the war has gone into a whole new trajectory in the last few hours. Now, on Sunday, 2 major bridges were blown up overnight in the bordering regions of Russia. The first explosion hit a highway bridge over a railway in Bryansk, just as a passenger train with 388 people was passing underneath. In the second attack, a freight train was damaged when a railway bridge was blown up in Kursk. Now, while these blasts took place in Russia, Ukraine was hit by 472 Russian drones and 7 missiles overnight. It was the highest number of drone attacks launched by Russia since the beginning of the war. Russia also claimed a strike on training ground in Ukraine. In a rare admission of its military losses, the Ukrainian army said that the strike had killed a dozen soldiers. The attacks led Ukrainian ground forces commander Mikhailo Drapety to announce his resignation. Hours later, Ukraine claimed that it has carried out a large-scale drone attack on multiple Russian air bases. The attacks hit deep inside Russian territory. The farthest of these bases was Belaya Airfield, that you see. Now, the airfield in Kursk region hosts the 444th and 200th Heavy Bomber Aviation Regiments that operate the Tu-22M3 aircraft, as well as the 181st Independent Composite Aviation Squadron with AN-12 and AN-30 planes. The Olenia Guba Naval Base in Murmansk region was also hit. The base is the main military intelligence structure in charge of seabed warfare and cable disruption activities. Ivanova Air Base, the northeast of Moscow, and the Agilevo Base, that is located south of Moscow, also came under attack. A huge explosion also rocked the Russian Arctic city of Severomorsk, which is home to Russia's largest fleet of nuclear submarines. Ukraine also claimed significant damage. A source in Ukraine's security services said that the coordinated attacks hit 41 aircraft. Now, these include the Tu-95 and Tu-22 strategic bombers and the A-50 radar detection and command aircraft. President Zelensky claimed the attack destroyed 34% of Russian strategic bombers carrying cruise missiles. He claimed that the operation inflicted damages amounting to $7 billion, using 117 drones. The Ukrainian security sources said that drones had been smuggled into Russia and hidden in wooden structures installed on trucks. The roofs were then opened remotely to let the drones fly towards their targets. Russia's defense ministry confirmed that the drones were not launched from Ukrainian territory, but in the immediate vicinity of the air bases. And well, that's all the developments coming in. Back to you, Diksha.
Right, thank you so much for getting us those details, Jyotsna. And now for more, we're being joined live by Omar Omekisil from Ankara. He's a non-residential fellow at the Atlantic Council and strategic and defense analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast on WION World is One. Omar, what do you think Zelensky was trying to achieve with Operation Spiderweb, especially just before the crucial bilateral talks that are happening in Istanbul today?
I think this operation was not conducted overnight, as actually the Ukrainian side said the planning phase has taken 1.5 years, and it's quite probable that it took so long. So it was not timely, especially in regards to the negotiations. But I think that the sign to go ahead and the green light by the Ukrainian president was given just before the negotiation in order to increase Ukrainians leverage at the negotiation table, and to show how vulnerable Russia is, and furthermore, to show to the US president that Ukraine actually possesses some cards to play in order to change the balance of power on the field, because the American side has been arguing that Ukraine should just make too many concessions, accommodate Russia, and basically surrender to Russian demands. But as they do not have the capability to resist against Russia. So the Ukrainian president has now taken a strategic move to empower his nation's position at the negotiation table. For Russia, this is obviously a huge debacle and a huge problem.
Right, and Ukraine has carried out one of its boldest attacks by striking Russia's strategic bomber fleet. And given the targets that it has hit in Russia, several air bases and a naval base, help us understand just how significant these targets are.
I mean, first of all, the geography is quite interesting. It is far deep inside Russia. It's far away from the front lines between Ukraine and Russia. And actually, this is an area where Russia felt most safe, also historically during the Soviet Union. And most of its strategic bombers were located in this region, as they were, due to geographical distance, away from any potential front line, and would be in the most safest place. So the Ukrainians hit Russia where they felt the most secure. Secondly, the strategic fleet, would not have a direct impact on the Ukrainian-Russian war per se, because these strategic bombers were relatively less used, but it will affect the balance of power between NATO and Russia, and will further diminish the Russian role as a superpower in the global international system. So this is basically an attack that will decrease Russia's international standing rather than directly affect the Ukrainian-Russian war.
Right, Omar, in terms of optics, we'll have to see how this attack is actually going to change the balance of power right now. But based on the reports, we know that a senior CBS News correspondent has said that the White House was not aware of Ukraine's plan to conduct the attack. But we also have reports from Kiev where we see that Kiev is saying that it, in fact, did alert the Trump administration of the attack in advance. Now, do you think the US really did not know about the attack in advance?
With advance, we have to say, what do we mean with advance? If we mean that the US knew this in the planning stage 1.5 years ago, I highly doubt that. And as Ukraine would not risk an intelligence leak, and all of this operation was conducted by equipment and means the Ukrainians don't need the United States of America, so it doesn't make sense that the US is being notified in advance. However, it is possible that in the immediately before the launch of the attack, maybe just seconds or probably maybe some minutes ahead, the Ukrainian side may have notified the American side just for them to have a heads up. But this is not a notification in terms of an operational notification. This is just a notification and heads up, which is not very important. It is just to notify the Americans for them to know before they know this from the media.
Right, Omar, and from a military perspective, what retaliatory measures or capabilities might Russia deploy following these targeted attacks on its military assets? And more importantly, do you think there could be a nuclear escalation in the war?
So when we look at the invasion of Ukraine and what happened since, we see that Ukraine was quite able to target several Russian air bases throughout this war. And it appears that the Russian side has still not learned to take necessary precautions, measures, and the Russian side is still not capable of protecting its air fleet at the air bases. And this is a doctrinal issue. So the Russian military doctrine needs to be updated in order to ensure security. For instance, China has a different approach, and this attack would not be possible if the Ukrainian army would have tried to attack the Chinese air fleet. The Chinese air fleet has a much different posture and would be therefore less risky in such an operation attack. In terms of nuclear warfare risk, this risk is still present, has been present since day one, since the invasion of Ukraine, and it is always an option for Russia to use especially tactical nukes. However, that being said, the usage of tactical nukes is something very risky, and this will complicate everything in the war. And it doesn't look like Russia is keen on using these nuclear warheads. Rather, Russia wants to maintain this threat of nuclear escalation in order to leverage its negotiation position and maintain its role as a superpower next to Russia, the United States and China. But this approach by the Russians will probably result in them not using nuclear warheads in Ukraine. That being said, there's always the risk that there might be some miscalculation, that there might be some other form of calculation in the Kremlin. And for that, we need peace as urgently as possible, because this risk is just too risky for everyone in the world.
Absolutely, and we'll have to wait and see what the outcome will be after the bilateral talks that are happening in Istanbul. But for now, thank you so much, Omar, for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.